Let's talk about what education should look like in our country moving forward with our next guest. He is Andrew Handel, director of the American Legislative Exchange Council's Education and Workforce Development Task Force. He has been on the program before, and we're happy to welcome him back. ALEC.org is the website. Andrew, good afternoon. Welcome back to the Tim Jones and Chris Harp Show here at NewsTalkSTL.
Welcome.
Hey, Tim and Chris, great to be back with you.
Indeed. Andrew, to Secretary McMahon's point, and I want you to talk about her involvement in general. I know everyone at ALEC has had a really great and developing relationship with her in the education space. And even though Andrew, I know you all focus on K through 12 and she was referring more to higher ed. I mean, Andrew, the principle is the same, right? Like universities, high schools, even grade schools, they should be places where learning is free and abundant, and we want people to challenge each other and the establishment, right? And we want people to be free thinkers and not forced into any sort of different philosophy, right?
Yeah, 100%, Tim. I think the secretary put it best, when she said it's, important that we don't cower, but, we stay vigilant. But most importantly, we still want these students, engaging in active debates, civil debates. I mean, that's what was, so great about Charlie Kirk and Turning Point, going around and doing these events was, he was able to have these peaceful, respectful dialogues with folks. We want to continue to see more of that. And I really think that's the best way to honor his memory moving forward. So, definitely just encourage everyone to continue having those debates, stay civil, but exactly to your point, we want these college students, exploring different worldviews and being challenged, and we want to continue to see that.
Andrew, the 2024 NAEP scores have been released, and the findings are just astoundingly bad. 12th grade reading, 35% of students performed at or above proficient level. 12th grade math, 22% of students at or above proficient. 8th grade science, 31% of 8th graders are at or above proficient. Education was always supposed to be the great equalizers, and these scores tell me that we could have in the future a greater divide between the have and the have-nots because of these scores. What future do you see for our nation with these NAEP scores being so poor?
Yeah, Chris, I think you hit the nail on the head there. One of the most eye-opening numbers that came from this data release was this widening gap between the top performing students and the bottom performing students. If you look at the 90th percentile in 12th grade reading, for example, those scores have stayed roughly flat since we first started tracking this data back in 1992. If you look at the 10th percentile of students, which are the worst performing, that number has dropped by 25 points over that same time frame. So you've seen effectively a 33% increase in the gap between the highest achieving students and the lowest achieving students. So that's a major point of concern. I think these numbers are just, further reinforcement of why school choice and education freedom are so important, and why you're seeing so many states now pushing for this. Take Missouri, for example. Not quite universal for all students yet, but the legislature's been moving in the right direction, expanding the Most Scholars program. I know Governor Kehoe has been a major champion of that as well. So, but 4 of the 8 states that Missouri shares a border with now have universal education freedom programs. And so I think that's where these states are heading, and not just from an academic achievement standpoint, but even from an economic standpoint, right? When parents are making decisions on where they want to move their families to, that's one of the things that they're going to look at in addition to taxes and other things. So it's also a competitiveness issue for Missouri too.
And Andrew, even though the national trend is somewhat bleak when you look at the nation as a whole, Andrew, there are plenty of diamonds in the rough, right? And I know you know this because ALEC operates in all 50 states. You get to speak to lawmakers and policymakers and stakeholders from all across the nation. And states like, for example, Florida, who have led the charge on school choice proposals now for going into the 3rd decade, are proof in the pudding, right, Andrew, that if you empower parents, then student performance will follow, correct?
That is exactly it. Yeah. So the data that was just released, it's actually not broken out by state. It's just at a national level. But if you look at something like fourth grade reading scores, which came out recently, Florida ranks 43rd in the country in terms of per pupil spending. They spend about $12,000 per student per year. But their fourth grade reading scores, they're tied for 10th best in the country. Mississippi is another good example. They rank 44th in the country in terms of per student spending. Their fourth grade reading scores are tied for 7th. You can contrast that with New York, which is right up there at the top. They spend $33,000 per student.
Wow.
Their fourth grade reading scores are tied for 22nd. Oregon, is the last one that I'll mention. They rank 15th in terms of per student spending. Those fourth grade reading scores are 46th worst in the country.
Holy
so
smokes.
This has nothing to do with spending. This is all about how states are spending this money, empowering parents, and giving them those choices. That's what leads to proven results.
And Alex, Andrew, you may have answered this. This is a very complex problem to trying to fix our schools, but what is it? Is it the teachers union, the students, the curriculum, not enough money being spent, all of the above? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think it's a combination of most of those things that you just mentioned. It is definitely not a money problem, though. That's the biggest thing that I would emphasize. I mean, we, as a country, collectively, we spend $857 billion every year on K through 12 education. It's a huge number, and we're just not getting the results. So, that's why, here at ALEC, we're giving a lot of support to the U.S. Department of Education in President Trump's effort to return education back to the states. We want states to be in charge, and we want them to be finding these innovative new solutions like, things like education savings account programs, which let parents kind of direct the state education dollars that would have otherwise gone to a public school. But, if that student is going to learn better in a homeschool or a virtual school or a private school, why not let those dollars follow them and enable that family to send their kid to the best learning environment for them? So, ultimately, that's what it's all about. And that's what, we're excited to see even more of moving forward.
Speaking to Andrew Handel, director of ALEC's Education Workforce Development Task Force, ALEC, ALEC.org. Andrew, ALEC has so many resources for state lawmakers, for policymakers, for stakeholders, for parents who are interested in this subject, which I hope all of them are. You help put together a publication every year, the ALEC Index of State Educational Freedom. Andrew, what are some of the basics that we can look at when we see states that are doing it right versus states that are doing it wrong? How can states move into that upper echelon of providing better solutions in our struggling educational system?
Yeah, definitely. Well, like you mentioned, we've got our Index of State Education Freedom. We released the second edition this year. We've just started work on the third edition, which will come out early in 2026. But yeah, we look at each state across 5 different categories. So we look at, are there any student-centered funding programs? So things like those education savings accounts.
Mm-hmm.
There's also things like tax credit scholarship programs and other things that states can do to make sure that dollars are following students, not being tethered to systems. The other categories that we look at charter schools, homeschools, virtual schools, and then open enrollment, which is essentially your public school choice. So we look at each state's policies in those different areas, and we try to figure out how easy is it for parents to utilize these options. Is it even a legal option, right? There's only a handful of states that still don't allow charter schools, for example. So we look at all of those things and figure out how conducive are these policies to these different educational environments. How easy is it for parents to use them? And we, produce a total score for those states. So like you mentioned, Florida right up there at the top. That was the only state in this year's edition to earn an A+. They've been leading the way on this for a long, long time, several decades. And they're just they just continue to be at the cutting edge of these different policies. So, Florida is a great example for states to look to in terms of what should we be doing in education to improve student test scores.
Indeed.
Andrew, my mother had a 40-year teaching career. She started her career as a Title I reading teacher. The middle portion of her career, she was a fifth grade teacher. And then at the end of her career, she worked for a private company that taught reading and Title I reading and math in inner city private schools. And the thing that she noticed all throughout her career was a lack of involvement by parents, especially African American parents. There seems to be the thought that their child's education starts when they start kindergarten instead of working with them before they get to that point. How do you get parents involved in their children's education? Because I think that would dramatically increase test scores if parents were more involved. What's the plan for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, too, that's a side effect of giving parents more choice in terms of where they can send their kids to school. I mean, there's so many families in so many different places around the country where, they're not even thinking about a private school or homeschool or, any of those other things because they just can't do it. They might not have the money for it. Both parents are working, so they can't homeschool. There might be a variety of different reasons there, but when we create these new programs and we make those other options viable by making sure that those taxpayer funds are being spent in the most efficient way possible and putting parents in charge of that, I think that kind of inherently kind of forces those parents to take a closer look at, their kid's education. What does my kid need? Where are they thriving? Where do they need help? And most importantly, what school is going to help my kid, achieve the most down the line. So yeah, exactly to your point, parental involvement is so huge. We've seen a number of states as well pass parental Bill of Rights legislation. Florida is another good example of a state that's leading on that front too. So yeah, we've seen, a couple of different policy solutions, but I'd say those parental bills of rights and education freedom are probably the top two to help get parents more involved.
And just a quick anecdotal story, and I'm sure other teachers could give the same story, that whenever my mother would have a parent-teachers conference, that the parents that would show up would be the parents of the kids that were doing good in school, but the parents of the kids that were doing terrible never showed up. She'd sit there for 2 hours for a parent-teachers conference. Maybe one, maybe two parents would show up.
Yeah, it's a shame. Yeah, we'd love to see more and more parents involved, and I think we have been seeing more parents get involved, especially since COVID. But to your point, there's still so many kids that need that element in their life, and there's only so much we can do in the classroom, right? Having those parents involved outside the classroom is another key element to it as well.
And finally, Andrew, my understanding is that the One Big Beautiful Bill has a lot of education reform type policies in that have now been made available to the states to help them expand their programs and support states' efforts in this area, right?
Yeah. Gosh, where do I start? Well, I think probably the biggest thing that's gotten the most attention is the One Big Beautiful Bill actually creates a brand new federal tax credit scholarship program. So basically the way that's going to work is it offers a dollar for dollar credit to individuals who donate to scholarship granting organizations, and those organizations then provide scholarships to low income households so that their kids can attend private school. So that's not actually going to get up off the ground until January 2027 at the earliest. We're still waiting for the rulemaking process to get started on that. But hopefully once we've got that, we'll know a little bit more about how states can opt in to participate. The other big thing that I would highlight in that bill is some major 529 account changes. Historically, 529 accounts could only be used for higher education expenses. That changed a couple of years ago with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. They added in K through 12 private school tuition as something that you could pay for out of your 529. they've now expanded that to a whole bunch of different K-12 expenses. Things like tutoring, therapies for kids with special needs, books, school supplies, uniforms, you name it, all those things are now in there. And they've also doubled the limit on the annual withdrawals for that as well. So they've gone from $10,000 a year to $20,000 a year that parents can now spend that 529 money on K through 12 expenses. So that is another huge change that I don't think has gotten as much attention, but I think that's going to make a huge difference for a lot of families around the country.
All excellent and positive news indeed. From Andrew Handel, Director of ALEC Education Workforce Development Task Force, ALEC.org, ALEC, ALEC.org. Andrew, always great to get an update from you on the education landscape in the country. Thanks for joining us. We'll have you back again soon.
Thanks.